It's just so wonderful to be back amongst you, and I am so thankful to be asked to come and speak today, and I hope this is the first of many more to come. I want to talk a little bit about what I have learned in seminary. For those of you who know, when I moved out to Madison with my mom, I was also entering seminary. And it's been a journey, as one would think it would be. One of the first things that we talked about in one of my very first classes was what is a spiritual life. Now, I read in one of the UUC emails, there was a problem with this word or concern with spiritual, right? Or there was some dichotomy going back and forth with it. So in reading this, I thought, well, I'll take up this challenge. Not afraid of a risk to bring this back forward and to basically push full steam ahead in this blue boat that I have learned to love. Even in seminary, defining a spiritual life was like throwing your spaghetti against a wall that was already covered with spaghetti to see what was stuck and what was knocked off. I think the only thing that we all decided on is that you cannot define spiritual or spirituality, nor can you really define a spiritual life. Basically, I felt at home like it was a class of UUs, that we couldn't agree on anything. There were students who proclaimed spirituality was another word for religion, and they found that problematic. They didn't want spirituality associated with religious causes or with religion structure. Others found spirituality as not a human construct, but a term to describe the unknown with a capital U, the question of godly existence. For some students, however, spirituality was clearly defined with historical rituals to practice, accepted writings from people who wrote hundreds of years ago, which are supposed to apply today, and compulsory behaviors that were seen as accepted, nay, even mandatory, the ways to live a good life. As part of the assignment, we were asked how we are going to define our spirituality and live a spiritual life. And I was like, wow, jumping in, feet first semester, here we go. And it reminded me of a conversation I had with our beloved Reverend David before he left. When I was thinking about applying to seminary, I went to him and I talked to him about it. And I said, how spiritual do you need to be a minister? Thinking, on a scale of 1 to 10, David, where do I rank? But asking this question is like asking Chet, how much really is that in between? Things that are not easily answered, but are freely questioned. So in my conversation with Reverend David, he talked to me about his own spirituality and the fact that he didn't think he was a spiritual person. That the closest to him for a theology was humanism. And if you understand humanism and being a humanist, you realize that you emphasize the human reason, the ethics, and social justice over supernatural belief or divine revelation. So I thought about how Reverend David approached his life as a humanist, what I saw in him. He was very spiritual to me. He was a treasured spiritual leader and guide for me in some of my darkest places. When I would talk to him, he did not tell me to recite 5 Hail Marys and 2 Our Fathers. He did not tell me to get on my knees and pray 5 times a day, nor did I have to do hours of meditation to reach nirvana. But he talked about all the troubles that we have as human beings, all the encounters that come to us as a humane society and the ugliness of what it is to live in an inhumane society. But the greatest thing I took away was that Reverend David's theology was love. Just human love. Being a nice guy, a humane individual, living people, loving people, treasuring relationships. It was hard to put this on a paper, especially when I wanted an A. But, I got it somehow. Got it right somehow. And I wrote about how my reverend created this humanist theology of love. And that he would seek these answers. He would question for himself what he needed to. And he actually was probably one of the biggest Mother Nature lovers that I learned was related to his spirituality. So I wrote about the wisdom that he might have gotten in the woods that he walks, the rivers that he paddles, and the mountains he climbs. And I said, I agree. I think Mother Earth could be a shaman, calling forth messages in driving winds, tears of shared grief in raindrops, celebrations in rainbows across the skies, and rays of sunshine carrying hope for the day. I may be talking about David like he's dead, but to my knowledge, he isn't. But I wanted to start with him and this conversation because it was where he brought the idea of curiosity into spirituality. And when I think about what being religious or being spiritual or having not necessarily a calling, because I never had a calling per se, but this idea of a greater something, I realized that I am no longer in line with what mainstream Catholicism taught me when I was growing up. My spiritual journey has brought me to a tribe of 12 very strong and empowered goddesses. I know my dad's probably turning over right now. Sorry, Dad. Sorry, Dad. I should really watch where my head goes, right? So these 12 goddesses serve as my sages. They are my wisdom keepers, my healers, my oracles, and my daily companions. They welcome me into their dancing circle on a beach. I go to them in my mind during meditation, waiting in a grocery store line, or in a silent hike in the woods. Sometimes I call them forward. Other times I sense them near me. Each has unique gifts they bestow on me during times of need and confusion. They celebrate me with songs of jubilation, and I can feel their hugs of inspiration and validation. Today, I cherish one more than the others, my mothering goddess. Now, embracing spiritual life that has goddesses and not a god with a capital G took some Catholic undoing, but more importantly, a journey into what would be a curious adventure. So let's talk about this word, curiosity. I'm not going to bore you with some dictionary definition, but ask you to think about it the way you would have had to in my theological class, right? Curiosity relating to spirituality. And maybe it doesn't relate for you, and that is fine. I believe curiosity is a natural inclination that babies are born with in order to learn. If a baby was not curious about sound, vision, touch, they would not learn anything. It is the want to know that encourages them to explore their environment and test their infantile hypotheses. Knowledge comes from a sense of curiosity. I believe curious adventures start from a place of safety, security, and love. Research and parenting books talk about the important years of 0 to 3 when a baby has the opportunity of attachment. For those of you who are not familiar, attachment theory is this really important psychological framework that proposes that the strong emotional bond between infants and their primary caregivers is a crucial item for survival and healthy development. I think it is the safe, secure, and loving environment, and that this foundation allows for curious endeavors. I know that many times attachment theory is applied only to mother and child, but I want to say that it recognizes all caregivers, no matter the gender of the person. The bottom line in this scenario is that the infant has a world where curiosity is nurtured and promoted. They feel safe to explore the universe and the questions of why, how, who, when, and where. Rachel Carson, the famous American marine biologist and conversationalist, who died in 1964 at the very young age of 57. I had no idea she was that young. She wrote, "A child's world is fresh and new and beautiful, full of wonder and excitement. It is our misfortune that for most of us, that clear-eyed vision, that true instinct for what is beautiful and awe-inspiring, is dimmed and even lost before we reach adulthood. If I had influence with the good fairy who was supposed to preside over all children, I should ask her to gift each child in the world to be a sense of wonder so indestructible that it would last throughout their life. And it would serve as an unfailing antidote against the boredom and disenchantments of later years, the sterile preoccupation with things that are artificial, and the alienation from the sources of our strength." Our greatest mother, Mother Earth, provides a world full of curious questions open to our exploration as we live our complicated human lives. In my tribe of 12 goddesses, I have 2 mothering goddesses. One seeks to fulfill the mothering that I am losing as my mother slips farther and farther into the Alzheimer's world of loss and silence. I recognize that I miss the sense of being mothered. Those times when I knew that I had one person in the world who loved me no matter what, my mom. Those times when I didn't know what to do because of whatever confusion, and I had one person who would listen to me when others were too busy, my mom. Those times when I had something great to share and would have one person who was just as excited and happy as I was, my mom. This mothering goddess opens her arms to me when I need the safety, security, and love of a mom. The second mothering goddess is the one who watches over my mother. My mother's spirit of who she was when I was growing up and the woman I got to know in my adulthood is no longer here. I sense that that spirit has left her body a couple of months ago. she leaves me, or now that she is gone, I am loving on and spoiling and smiling and laughing with this elderly woman who is clueless about the world around her, which may actually be a heavenly spot in today's world. This goddess who watches over my mother comforts me by taking care of my mom's spirit, no matter where it is, and releases me from the guilt I feel when I think about how I should be a devoted, doting daughter. But going back to this idea of curiosity, when one has a foundation that encourages and nurtures a sense of curiosity, one is free to ask questions about what is real, seek answers to what confuses them, and define how they see the world. Religions such as Buddhism, Taoism, and Hinduism embrace this idea of a beginner's mind, many often described as a baby's mind or the new mind. And it is an approach to life where all things are new, even though it's the same coffee, it's the same clothes, it's the same car, it's the same ride to work or the same ride to church. All of it is still new every day. The day can be filled with open-ended questions, and where the questioning is the journey, not the destination. In this sense of curiosity, with a capital C, one can discern the big life words: love, peace, faith, and trust. What does it mean to lead with love? What does it mean to live in the grace of peace? What does it mean to have faith in the unknown? And what does it mean to trust human goodness? Curiosity may also lead to no definition of spirituality or no sense of a spiritual life. On the one hand, one is content with not answering the big questions or defining the big words. And they're fine and they're happy. They accept that there are no prescribed right answers. On the other, one may rebuke spirituality altogether for scientific-based fact. Their sense of freedom to live as they choose is without the limitations of any spiritual practice or religious dogma. But I challenge those who find themselves there. What if you thought or defined spirituality as curious theology with a capital C and a capital T? Maybe this would entail the beginner's mind of the infant, that there is no set right or wrong answers to be found. There is no need to acknowledge sin, whatever that may be, or fear a trip down yonder to see my dad. Just kidding. There are no pearly gates being guarded by some white guy in a robe with sandals. There is no God, goddess, divine leader, or God-forsaken devil. Curious theology comes from a spirit of not knowing, but maybe knowing. Darn it, I used that word again, spiritual. When looking at this, Leo Babourgeois wrote in Approaching Life with Beginner's Mind that there could be benefits to have this approach to life. With a beginner's mind approach, you may have better experiences. You aren't clouded by prejudgments, preconceptions, fantasies about what it should be, or assumptions about how you already know it will be. When you don't have these, you can't be disappointed or frustrated by the experience. Because there's no fantasy or preconception to compare it to, you choose. You are open to the curiosity wherever it takes you. With a beginner's mind approach, you may have better relationships. If you're talking to someone else, instead of being frustrated by them because they're not meeting your ideal, you can see them with fresh eyes and notice that they're just happy, that they're just trying to live a good life, that they're just trying to do what they have as the best intention, even though they're not the ones that you would intend for them. You become curious about the person, the human in this humanity. With beginner's mind approach, you may have less procrastination. If you're procrastinating on a big task, and you could look at it with the beginner's mind, and instead of worrying about how hard it's going to be or how long it's going to take or how confusing or how you may fail at it, you can be curious about what it will entail. Your curiosity will prompt you to action. And with beginner's mind, you may have less anxiety. If you have an upcoming event that you're anxious about, instead of worrying about what might happen, you can allow yourself to be curious about what will happen. Let go of your preconceived ideas about the outcome and instead embrace not knowing. Embrace being present and finding gratitude in the moment for what you're doing and who you're around. So back in my own beginner's mind, with my 12 dancing goddesses on a beach, I seek now the strength from one of my other goddesses, the one who puts love in the center of all things. She wraps my curious adventures with a sense of love, so I'm reminded that love helps promote acceptance, gratitude, interconnection, generosity, equality, and justice. May you find your own spiritual journey through a curious theological adventure. Blessed be.